It is good, and still the best yet to come. It's time for a Chat with Pat.
Yes, and today our guest is Brad Miner, husband and father, and is the senior editor of The Catholic Thing and a senior fellow at of the Faith and Reason Institute. And today we're going to be talking about an article he wrote called Lessons from the Gardens. Hello, Brad. How are you today?
I'm fine, Pat. How are you?
I am just fine, and I love this article. There is so much in here that I could ask you about to get you to go deeper, but can you kind of just give us this picture, because you kind of talk about yourself as you were a Methodist, but also kind of more of a pagan, you say, but you talk about your journey into the church. Can you give us a little insight into that? What brought you there?
Well, I can tell you exactly what brought me there. I was living in California after graduating from college, and as you say, I was sort of drifting through my life, not really sure what I believed, and I went back and forth with one belief system after another, but mostly just enjoying life in all the wrong ways, and then I was haunting a bookstore in Southern California, and I came across a book about the Catholic faith, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because I remembered being very much an anti-Catholic when I was in college.
Right.
Anyway, I'm reading this book, and one of the things that's in it, and this is not in the column, but I came across something called the Incarnation. Now, I'd gone through a confirmation class in the Methodist Church back in Ohio, where I grew up, and I don't think I ever heard them use that word. I mean, we believed in Jesus Christ. There was no question about that. I'd sort of drifted away from that. But the word incarnation hit me like a thunderbolt, because that meant Jesus is God. And if I heard that ever spoken in a Methodist church, I don't remember it. It certainly was not emphasized. It was more, Jesus is our brother. Jesus is our guide. Jesus is a great teacher. Mm-hmm. And as I say, when I realized that Jesus is God, I suddenly realized that the faith that I had rejected in college, I had a confrontation with a really wonderful professor who took me aside after I'd excoriated in an essay he gave me an A on and thought was very well written.
Yeah.
About one of the medieval popes, one of the Borgias, who had 7 children and
right, shining light,
yeah, not exactly the kind of guy that you would have thought would head up a holy institution. But he made it clear to me that I was being just a little bit sophomoric, you might say, and that if I took more time to reflect on the Roman Catholic Church, he was an Episcopalian, I might find that it was different. And so, connecting those things with understanding the Incarnation, I just dove into Catholicism, and I studied and I studied and I studied, and one day I went to the door of the rectory at St. James Church in Redondo Beach, California. I rang the bell. A wonderful Irish priest came to the door and asked me what it is I wanted, and I said, I want to be Catholic. And he looked at me. He was holding a book in his hand, and his glasses were up on his head. And he said, well, come on in then. And so for the next month or two, I met with him almost every day, and we went over and over and over, and I objected to things, and he talked to me, and I objected to things, and he talked to me, and then finally I made my profession of faith.
Wow. So what was your greatest lesson from the garden? Because that's the name of the
well,
article.
here's the thing. The point of the column, and this is sort of my approach to writing columns and writing books as well, is I don't like to just beat people over the head. So I started with structuring the column around quotations from the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
Because that's where it all begins, obviously. And in the end, the point of the column was to defend humane vitae.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we're seeing, and certainly I saw in my young life, was a drift away from traditional sexual ethics. Mm-hmm. Now, there are other issues in the church that are important, things that Pope Leo XIV is going to have to face up to and address But this one is key because it has to do with the human person. Who is the human person in the presence of God? And the way that sexual ethics have been demeaned over the generation that I've been living, and it's now, I'll be 78 in October. I've been living several generations, and many changes, as Cardinal Newman said. To live is to change. To be perfect is to have changed often. We've got to recenter ourselves on sexual ethics. We cannot compromise this because Humanae Vitae represented a kind of revolution, if only because so many of the people who were watching it, expecting it, knowing that this restatement of Catholic teaching on sexuality, they believed it was going to change things, that we were going to go the way of the Church of England and that we were going to liberalize. And Paul VI resisted that. And that resistance is something that we have to rekindle now, because otherwise we're going to lose more battles against the secular culture than we've already lost.
And what I love, Brad, is, a couple of things. First of all, that you read this document even before you were Catholic, if I understood your article correctly.
No, it was after.
After you became Catholic. And then you talk about this idea that by loosening these kinds of things, it doesn't bring people to the church, which I think is one of the big mistakes we make in our society. We think if we make things easy, more people will be a part of it.
Exactly right, Pat. And I mean, you see this, especially in the German church. They really seem firmly committed to the idea that unless they go the way of the secular culture, they're going to continue to lose people. And they have been bleeding Catholics. And it's a special situation, in Germany, because they have a church tax. The government deducts from people's income money to give to the particular faith community of which they're a part. And you have to check a box on your tax form to say, I'm Catholic, I want a certain percentage of my income to be given to the Catholic Church in Germany. Well, people have been bailing on that. They've been losing members anyway, but then people who are still going to church are unchecking that box. So the Germans, because they depend upon that, are, I think, a little bit more inclined to think, what can we do? How can we bring people back? And as they see that the culture is becoming more liberal in Germany, they think that's the way to go. And I believe that is exactly the wrong approach. And as we know, what all the surveys seem to indicate, and in big countries like the United States and in Great Britain and in France, the more traditional young people are coming into the church, and the less traditional ones are fleeing. There are more nuns, around than there are devout people, but that seems to be changing. And if we can just hold on to the core teaching, we're not going to lose people, and we'll bring more people in.
I think you are definitely right on that, Brad. And I do encourage people to read this article because he just does a magnificent job with it. And the quote you use from the encyclical is amazing, too. The balance is just so important. So we are already out of time. I could talk to you forever, Brad, but thanks so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, and let people know Brad Miner, husband, father. He's the senior editor of The Catholic Thing and a senior fellow of the Faith and Reason Institute. And you can read this article, Lessons from the Garden, at thecatholicthing.org.
What a great conversation. Wow.
Yeah, it was predictable that was going to go very, very well, and it lived up to the expectation. Thank you very much, Pat.
Yeah,
love Brad.
Could talk to him forever.
It's so well explained,
And of course, you're gonna chat with Joan Watson tomorrow, right?
Yes, is it Thursday? Then it must be Joan Watson.